Hi everybody, welcome to my channel Statistical. And today in this video we are going to talk about various steps involved in any research process. Since this is an important topic for all UGC NET exam paper 1 under research aptitude. Also this is an important topic for those who are taking any exam in research methodology. Which has become one of the main subjects in any courses like MBA, nursing, medicine, engineering, education, so on and so forth. The paper on research methodology is a prerequisite for anyone who wishes to do PhD in any subject. So please watch this video till the end. Now, for the entire steps in research process are given in the form of a flowchart here. Now first let us define what is research. Research, as you all know, consists of two simple words. Re meaning again and again. Search meaning finding out something new. So to put it simply, we can say research is finding out something new and useful by searching again and again. There are various definitions with more and more of characteristics of research which you will learn as you jump into the research process and start your own studies. Now coming to the process, research process. Any process consists of many steps. So here the research process consists of various steps that are involved in research. And we can say in any research process approximately there are 7 steps. I think it's better to say at least 7 steps because the number may vary 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 maybe in various books. We need not get carried away by these numbers. Some authors combine 2 or 3 steps together in a single step. And while others count them as separate steps. That is why there is a difference in the number of these steps. So see here the flow chart which is given here depicting the various basic fundamental steps in order. We will see each step in the process, in the research process in detail. Now let us see the 7 steps in order. The very first step is defining the research problem or the research question. And the second step is literature review. And this means reading a lot of books, articles, write-ups, newspaper, etc. And the third is formulation of hypothesis. And this step depends on the type of the research. For example, there may not be a hypothesis in descriptive type of research. In that case, the third step may not be there and the overall number of steps get reduced to 6. So it all depends on the type of the research we are using. And the fourth step is the research design, and which is the blueprint of the research we are going to undergo. And the fifth step is collect data, data collection. This involves collecting whatever information we need for our research study using the tools of data collection. And then the sixth step is analysis of data. And this may include the testing of hypothesis if there is any. This includes various statistical analysis, very many statistical calculations and techniques, which we will be discussing in a separate video. And if there is a hypothesis in the research you are undertaking, then you may also have to test it with the help of your data by using the appropriate statistical technique. And if your hypothesis is true, then accept it, and if it is false, then reject it. And finally, the eighth step, which is the interpretation and communication of your findings. And you will report your findings in your thesis, articles, or journals. And now we will see each of these steps in detail. Now, discussing about the first step, that is the defining the research problem or the research question. This step in research is a very crucial step because this step actually determines all the steps that follow. A problem well defined is half solved. It's usually a question for which the answer is to be found out, or it may be a problem for which a solution needs to be worked out. And choosing a problem, it all depends on the area of your interest and study. In defining the problem or in formulating the research problem, usually a number of sequential formulations are set up one after another, each one more specific than the previous one. Generally, the sources of research problems are everyday life, that is from our day-to-day life, from our experiences. We come to select what problem we want to solve. Like for example, what educational practice works well in a classroom? This is a research question. And second source of problem is practical issues that we come across in day-to-day life. The gaps and shortcomings in the existing theories, and they could be reached as our problem or our question to be studied. And the third source of research question is the past research and scientific literature. They are the excellent sources of research ideas. By going through the past research and literature, you will come across many gaps in the knowledge, which you can choose as your problem and proceed with your research. And as you go through the literature already available in the area of your interest and find out the gaps, what is not being done already and what needed to be done, and choose it as your topic. And finally, rationalism, that is inductive and deductive reasoning, will provide you with many research ideas. Now we will see what are the criteria that a researcher should consider before choosing a research problem. Well, when defining the research problem, one has to take into consideration both external and internal criteria. What are they? External criteria refers to the feasibility and novelty of the problem. Always, when you are selecting a problem, it should be new, that is novelty. That is not done by anybody else. And at the same time, it must be feasible for the researcher, that is time-wise, resources-wise. It should be feasible for you to undertake it. That is feasibility. So these two constitute what is known as the external criteria, novelty and feasibility. They are external to you. So that is why we call it external criteria. And what are internal criteria? It refers to you, the researcher. The researcher interest, it should cater to your interest of the researcher and his competencies, and you should have the proper skills to undertake that research, and you should have your own resources, both material wise and skill wise. So they constitute what is known as internal criteria. So based on these both and internal and external criteria, the researcher has to choose the research problem or the research question. No, the second step in the research process is literature survey. This step involves reading a lot in order to gather knowledge in the chosen field. Already a broad area is chosen, and then you have to define the problem. And there are two types of literature survey. The first one is the survey of concept and theories. And the second one is the survey of earlier work already done in the field. So first type of survey involves studying about the concept and theories as explained by the experts in that field, so that the researcher gets the first-hand information about the theories and concepts he is going to deal with. Secondly, he goes through the various work done by various authors in these chosen field. So both the type of survey are equally important for good research. Usually one source of literature will lead to another one. If I can cite you an example. For my PhD, my research was on, the topic was a comparative analysis of metacognitive strategies adapted by students of different professional courses. So I had to do two types of survey. First, I had to go through all the books, journals, articles regarding the concept of metacognition. Who defines what? According to these people, what is metacognition? And various people define it in various ways. So I have got to get familiarized with the concept of metacognition and also about the various strategies used by different persons. And so I had to go through journals on concepts and theories of metacognition. Then I had also to go through the work already done earlier in this field of metacognition. What have they done? What methods they have chosen? What population they have chosen? And what is the sample? So what is the design of the research? Everything. For all these things, I had to go through the earlier work done on the metacognitive strategies. So one has to go through both the types of literature available in that particular field. Coming to the second point, that is survey of earlier work done. If you go through meta-analysis, what is meta-analysis? Meta-analysis is some authors, they go through all these concepts, all the journals available, all the books available, all the work available, and they publish an analysis of these work already done. That is meta-analysis. So analysis is you are analyzing it and you are producing a paper, and another author analyzes all the papers on this topic and he meta-analyzes it and he publishes a paper. That is called meta-analysis. So that makes our job easier. Instead of going through all the journals, all the articles on metacognition, if I go through all the articles meta analysis, then I'll get a review of all the available papers. So that your job becomes a little easier. So the researcher has to undergo both the type of the survey. And now, the third step is formulation of hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? It is a tentative solution to a problem, or it is an assumption, or it is an expectation, or a supposition regarding a solution to a question. It may be a single proposition or a set of propositions set forth as an explanation for a particular phenomenon. It's a statement postulating a possible relationship between two or more variables or two or more phenomena. But remember, some of the research type, like a descriptive research, may not involve a hypothesis at all. I have already published a separate video on hypothesis, like hypothesis and overview, hypothesis classification, the types of hypothesis and hypothesis testing, and another video on illustration for hypothesis testing and the errors that may occur in hypothesis testing. So I have published nearly roughly 7 or 8 videos, both in Tamil and English, on hypothesis. Please refer to these videos, and whose links are given in the description box for your reference. Now, the next step in research design is research process is research design. What is research design? It is the overall plan of the research. It is the blueprint of the entire research. To be more precise, it is the outline story of your research. Any research without a design is an edifice without plan. Can you imagine a building without a plan? So you cannot imagine. The same way, you cannot imagine research without a research design. If you are proceeding your research without a design, without a blueprint, which may result in what do you call that? GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. In the parlance of computer science, it is. I don't know how to pronounce it. It is GIGO or GIGO. Garbage in, garbage out. We don't want that. So we need a research blueprint, research design. It is needed for the smooth conduct of the research. And this research design will include the sampling design, your observation design. How are you going to observe the data? And statistical design. How are you going to analyze the data? Your statistical design. And the operational design. What method you are going to employ? So all these constitute what is known as research design. Your design should answer all these questions. That include the nature of the population that you are going to do research with, and the sampling design, what type of sampling you are going to use, what number is your sample, and what is your pilot study. Are you going to conduct your pilot study? Pilot study is a rehearsal. Just before you publish your findings, you have to replicate your research. That is, before conducting the research, you should do the research in the form of a small scale. That is pilot study. If it is comes like this, what am I going to do? What are my analysis? So that way you have to design the pilot study. So some of the authors include these steps, like the type of the population, the type of the sampling, the type of data collection, all this as separate heading in the research process, and include it under different heading under the steps. That is why you are getting in a research process as 9 steps, 10 steps, or 11 steps, or even 16 steps. But the fundamental steps, as I have told you, I have listed 7 of them. So they may include it under separate heading, or they may put together all this sampling type, population type, everything in the overall research design. So these techniques, sampling techniques, data collection tools, methods of analysis, we will discuss each in a separate video later on. For time being, you understand just what is it. And what are the objectives of the research? What are the population characteristics? What constitute my population? What are the details to be observed? What method of sampling I am going to adopt? What is my sample size? What are the tools I am going to use for collecting data? And what is the method I am going to employ for my data analysis? And what are the statistical tests to be done? And what is the style of my report? Answers to all these questions constitute your research design. Now, next step involves collection of data. This involves a collection of lot of data. What is data? Data is the information the researcher wants from his sample for testing his hypothesis in order to come to a conclusion. A variety of tools are available for researchers for collecting data. For example, test is a tool. A test may be standardized or non-standardized. Interview is another tool, which may be structured or unstructured or semi-structured. Inventory is another tool. Observation, which could be participatory or non-participatory, is another tool. Survey is there, questionnaire, focus group discussion. So all these are tools used for collecting data. And I'll be publishing a separate video on various tools available for a researcher and its merits and demerits shortly. Each tool has got its own strengths and weaknesses. While selecting the appropriate tool, the researcher has to consider all these strengths and weaknesses and also taking into account the nature of his research design. He should choose the tool. And validity and reliability are two most important characteristics of any tool. For the definitions of validity and reliability and for the differences between them, please refer to my shorts on dazzling duality series in the channel Nalini Rajagovindan. The link for this short is given in the description box. Now, the data thus collected by using the tools are arranged systematically and they are analyzed in the next step, that is analysis of data. Analysis are of many types. The type of analysis the researcher undertakes is dependent on the research question. It may involve analyzing the measures of relationship between two variables, or it may involve the measure of relationship between multivariables, or finding the relationships in the measures of a single variable. And there are various methods available for determining this relationship. Testing of hypothesis is also done in this step if the research involves a hypothesis. And I have already published separate videos on hypothesis testing, hypothesis overview, and also types of hypothesis, and hypothesis testing illustration, and errors that may occur in hypothesis testing. You may refer to the description box for those links. Basically, there are two types of hypothesis testing which are available. One is the parametric method, which is also called as the standard test of hypothesis. And the second type is non-parametric testing or distribution-free hypothesis testing. Again, I'll be publishing a separate video on these two types of parametric and non-parametric hypothesis testing shortly, with suitable examples, of course. Now, the final stage in the research process is the conclusion or the interpretation of the results, and then the last one is the communication. You can have it as two separate steps, interpretation in one step and communication as another step. The number may vary. Don't bother about the numbers. Again, I tell you not to keep counting the number of the steps. You should know the order and the fundamental steps involved. I know whatever findings we got in the result for the selected sample is generalized for the entire population, and this we should do it very cautiously, because whatever findings, whatever results we got in our research study may not hold good for uh, the entire population. So we should be very careful, cautious while generalizing our findings. And communication of the result involves publication. It may be in the form of, because whatever findings we got, we have to communicate to the world, the other people, that what is our research work and what was the problem and what method we undertook and what findings we got and how it could be applied to the entire population. How can I generalize it to not only to the sample studied but also to the entire population? Will it hold good? What are the limitations? Everything I should communicate to the entire world. So I publish it maybe in the form of a thesis or a report in a scientific magazine or an article in a journal or in a newspaper. So these articles, reports and theses usually take up the format IMRAD. IMRAD. What is IMRAD? It is an acronym, abbreviation, where I stands for introduction, M for methodology, and R for result, and A for and, small a, and, D for discussion. So IMRAD. I for introduction, M for methodology, R for result, and discussion. So this is how the order should be. Usually when you write to a journal asking for the publication of your article in their journal, the editors will ask you to give that in IMRAD format. So you should know what does it mean. So first you should talk about give the introduction, then go to the methodology you are going to adapt, and then your result, and finally the discussion. This is called IMRAD format. You should never forget this acronym. Very important for any researcher. And usually the reports and articles or thesis for that matter usually takes the form of an hourglass. You know, the structure of your report should look like an hourglass. You know the structure of an hourglass. It will be broad above, narrow in between. You know hourglass? Broad above, narrow in between neck, and then again broad. So in the same way, your thesis should have a broad beginning. Because you are there in the beginning, you are going to talk about the problem, general problem encountered in the entire world. So you are going to talk about generally the problem, the topic. And then you are going to talk about the literature survey, which is also very wide. So that is why the beginning is very broad. And then in between comes the narrow part, where you should narrow down to your specific question, to your specific problem, to the specific hypothesis. You are going to narrow it down to that point. What is your problem you are going to resolve? What is the research question you are going to find the answer for? So there you are going to be very narrow, specific. The question should be very specific, narrow. And then again it goes broader at the end, where you will be discussing about the discussions and result, because you are going to discuss them in detail. What are the findings? Why you got it? You are going to interpret it. Why is that result? How is that result on comparison with other authors? You are going to discuss about each and everything. So that is why it is broader at the bottom. So that is why we say it takes the form of an hourglass model. The structure of your report or the structure of your thesis should be in the form of an hourglass, broad above, where you are going to discuss in detail, very wider form of introduction, and then the narrow specific problem, the research question, and then finally you are going to discuss it widely, generalizing it for the entire population, give reasons for your findings, interpret them in the proper manner, compare them with other findings, so which is going to be very broad. So this takes up the form of an hourglass. Got it? Again, I repeat the word here. The cautious generalization should be done, not haphazardly. You cannot conclude that this is the case for all the entire population. You cannot say so unless and until your sample is very, very representative. What does it mean? We will be discussing it in the separate video on sampling. And sometimes you may communicate your research work orally also. This involves interviews, workshops, seminars, conference where you are going to present your problems, your research, your methodology and your findings, everything orally you are going to communicate to the general public for their use, for their adoption in the future. Now we have discussed all the 8 steps or 7 steps involved in a research process in sequential order. Now what we can conclude is a good research should have clear concept and purpose, well-defined procedures, results, frankness in reporting, adequate data, and reasonable conclusion. And Francis Bacon, an English philosopher who has contributed much to scientific methods, as you know, research is very much a scientific method, and he has listed the various steps in beautiful words. Just listen to it, you will simply love it. Exhaustive collection, that is your collection of data. How it should be done? Exhaustively. You should not leave any data. So a researcher should collect as much data as possible. So that is what it means, exhaustive collection. And your observation. How should your researcher observe? Meticulous observation. You should not miss anything. You should not oversay it. You should not overstate it, or you shouldn't understate it. That it should be done meticulously. All the observations should be done very carefully, meticulously. See the powerful words he has used, meticulous observation. And then classification, how it should be done, careful classification. Any classification, as you all know, involves careful work. It involves a tremendous work and care. Classification, what is classification? You are going to put together similar things together and separate dissimilar ones. And it needs patience, and it needs perseverance, and it needs a lot of care. Otherwise, you will put all the dissimilar objects in the same group, or you may separate the similar ones into separate groups. That should not be the case in any classification. So it should be done very carefully. A researcher should classify his data very carefully. And then comes intelligent interpretation. After your work, after your research, you got some findings and you are going to interpret it. How should you do it? Intelligently. Oh, when I talk about intelligent interpretation, I am remembered of an story, anecdote, very interesting anecdote. A student of biology was dissecting the frog. As you all know, that the +2 students, they had to dissect in zoology class. They had to dissect a frog or lizard or sometimes rat even, in order to study the various system, nervous system, digestive system, and that was in practice before, but now they have removed the dissection part for the +2 students at least, because to avoid cruelty to animal. And so in those days, one of the students, you know what they do when they dissect a frog? They first nail all the 4 legs, one after another. So he started nailing the legs of the frog one by one. And he nailed the first leg of the frog and he said to the ears of the frog, jump. The frog jumped. Now the student nailed the second limb of the frog and he said jump to its ears. The frog again jumped, of course, with the remaining two legs. And then he did the same thing to the third leg. He nailed the third leg and said jump to the frog's ears. The frog did jump. And now, alas, he nailed all the four nails. And he said jump to the ears of the frog. Obviously, the frog did not jump. So this student of zoology wrote in his observation book, his record book, inference. You know, there is one column called inference, where you write your findings, interpretation. He writes there, the frog becomes deaf when all the four limbs are nailed. See, this is not intelligent interpretation. You see, what did he write? The frog becomes deaf when all the four limbs are nailed. This is what he interpreted. So this should not be the case. This is not an intelligent interpretation. It's just I am giving you, citing an example for a stupid result, stupid interpretation. And final thing, lastly comes the generalization part. And Bacon says it should be cautiously done. Cautious generalization. What do we mean? When we are generalizing the findings from the study of the sample to the entire population, we should be very cautious so as to not to overdo it, because it may not hold good for the entire population and it may not hold good for all times. So you should be very careful in generalizing your conclusion. So I was impressed by these words: exhaustive collection, meticulous observation, careful classification, intelligent interpretation, and cautious generalization. If you do not like these words, you can just ignore it. Now, I'm going to explain all these 8 steps involved in a research process using a single illustration. So from this topic, you could understand all the 8 steps of the research process in detail. What is the first step? That is the defining the problem. So any research should start with defining the problem. Now my problem, my title of my research is Performance of High School Students in Mathematics in relation to the utilization of the time allotted for the examination. So this is my title. So this is my statement of my problem. In this case, my problem is many of the students in high school, because there I have mentioned high school students. Many of my students in high school do not perform to their fullest capacity in the examination. So now, having defined the problem, I move on to the second step of the research process, namely literature survey. I read all the articles, books, journals that are available to see what work has been done earlier in this regard, like performance of students in mathematics in high schools. So I want to see what are the authors, what do they say, the reasons for this. They may cite so many problems, so many as the cause for the poor performance of students in mathematics. Finding that no work has been done for the high school students on the relationship between the performance of the students, which is my DV, dependent variable, and the utilization of full time allotted for the examination, which is my IV, independent variable. Why do I say independent variable? Because the time, utilization of the examination time is going to influence the performance of the students in mathematics. So the performance becomes dependent variable and the time, utilization of the time becomes the independent variable in my study. So I'm going to see the relationship between these two variables, IV and DV. So I'm choosing this topic. So I have done a literature survey, the second topic, and the third step in any research process is the hypothesis formulation. So I'm going to formulate my hypothesis for this research. What could be my hypothesis? Students who utilize the maximum allotted time, that is usually 3 hours, they perform better than those who leave the exam all early. So like 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 1.5 hours, they leave the hall. So they perform poor, but those who utilize the 3 hours fully, they perform better. This will be my hypothesis. Now, third step over hypothesis is formulated. Next comes my research design, which is the fourth step. And I'm going for experimental design. Because the conduct of exam, any exam is very much controlled. When the element control is there, it is always experiment. So I'm going to use experimental method of design for my research. So how do I control the examination? I inform all the hall supervisors not to force any students to utilize the maximum time allotted, which is the general practice in schools. The invigilators, they say, no, go back. I'm not accepting your answer sheet. You have to utilize the full 3 hours. Sometimes we do that. But so I have told the invigilators not to force the students. Let them give the papers if they want, answer sheets, even after 1 hour. Or let them utilize 3 hours, maximum 3 hours if they want. So let them decide it. The students decide it. I have told the hall supervisors. Now after the examination, so exam is over. Now comes the next step, that is data collection. So what are the data needed for this research? See, we need the time utilized by each student, which is the IB, and the scores, marks obtained by each student, that is the performance, which is my DV, dependent variable. So I collect these data. So I correct the papers and I get the marks and also the time utilized by each student. Now what do I do? The data analysis. I systematically, that is the sixth step, data analysis. Now I have corrected the papers. I have wanted all the data I wanted to have for my research, and I systematically arranged them, all the data in the Excel sheet with register number or maybe names and the time utilized and the scores, marks obtained. And to find out the relationship between these two variables, namely time utilized and scores obtained, marks obtained, I will use correlation analysis. It is a method of analysis in statistics. And many correlation methods are available in statistics, which we will be discussing in a separate video shortly. And I will analyze it using a particular method of correlation analysis and see if there is correlation between the time utilized and the performance of the student. And the next step, seventh one, is interpretation of the result. If my findings reveal, my correlation analysis reveal a positive correlation between the two variables, namely the time utilized and the scores obtained, then I will retain my hypothesis because it is found to be true. Yes, there is a positive correlation between the time utilized by the student and the performance. Otherwise, if my findings, there is no correlation or even there is negative correlation between these two variables, then I will reject my hypothesis because it is not true. So the time utilized by the student did not have any effect on the scores. So I reject my hypothesis. So this is how I test my hypothesis. And now comes the final step, the eighth step of my research, which is communication of my findings. And I'm going to publish my study as an article in a reputed journal because I cannot do it as a presentation as a thesis because this is not a PhD work. This is a very small study. So I'm going to publish an article in a reputed journal after complying all the ethical issues which are involved in a research study. For all the ethical issues involved in a research study, please refer to my earlier video on ethics in research. And the link is given in my description box. Please refer to it for all the ethical details involved in any research process. And I will see that my article is in IMRAD format with hourglass structure. So friends, I'm sure you have understood the basic steps involved in any research in order. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please subscribe to my channel Fun by Citadel and click the bell icon for further notifications. Thank you.